Hospital, she had several stab wounds.
Stabbed about 12 times in her upper torso.
Her body had been dumped along the road.
And the killer brought to justice.
Oscar Ray Bolin.
Vicious murderer.
Convicted killer on death row.
Hey, Oscar, what do you have to say today?
A one-time Florida truck driver awaiting execution for more than 20 years.
You are sentenced to death.
He is the evil in this world.
And the woman who married him.
I now pronounce you husband and wife.
Oscar Bolin is the love of my life.
I've been coming down this road for 20 years, twice a week.
Can you say wacko?
She believes her husband is innocent and says she can prove it. Evidence collected decades ago.
We've got a hair match. The FBI laboratory found wool fiber.
Now, explosive accusations and that lab under fire.
The culture at the FBI laboratory was one of, we have to establish guilt, plain and simple.
One woman, her 4 daughters, and the death row stepfather, one of them finally meets.
I've heard a lot about you.
I imagine you have.
And 3 grieving families who say this spouse has it all wrong.
I want him dead. And if I could kill him myself, I would.
Evidence of love. Welcome to 2020 on ID. I'm John Quinones. Imagine having security, wealth, a family, and then walking away from it all for a convicted murderer. That's exactly what the woman you're about to meet did. Some called her crazy. Members of the victims' families called her worse. Was Rosalie Bolin blinded by love, or did she know something others didn't? Evidence that could save her husband from execution. We first met Rosalie in 1996 and then again in 2015. As Deborah Roberts reported, the emotions were heated and the stakes couldn't have been higher. Oscar Ray Bolin's appeals were running out, but this wife's devotion couldn't have been stronger.
I've found myself in the last 18 years.
You found yourself? Being married to Oscar?
Yeah. He saved my life, actually. He really did.
How could he save your life, though, when he's behind bars?
To answer that question and to understand now, you have to understand then. The former Rosalie Martinez had everything she could want: marriage, motherhood, money. The triple crown with a mansion on Tampa's Hickory Creek Boulevard.
I had very expensive jewelry, 3-carat diamond earrings on each ear, 6-carat diamond ring, $500,000 house, Mercedes.
The wife of a prominent attorney, she lived in a lap of luxury with 4 beautiful young daughters and cameras recording every red-letter occasion. But Rosalie says something was missing, as she first told us back in 1996.
I wanted to break out. I wanted to be loved, like I've never been loved before. Passion. Somebody just to put you on a pedestal, not with material things, but emotions.
How could she trade all those jewels for jail, that fur for a felon? Rosalie remembers the moment she first laid eyes on Oscar Bolin. There was no spark at first. She was working in the public defender's office assigned to his case.
They opened the door, and there's just a young man standing there. His back is towards me, and he turns around. He said, "Who are you?" I said, "I'm here to help you." And I think I said, "I'm your angel."
Over a 2-year period, they grow closer, but law comes before love. Then, for Rosalie, a seismic revelation. She believes Oscar's innocent.
The documentation that I've gone through and the reports are totally conflicting. I was sent there for a purpose, a divine purpose, and I became obsessed with it. I wasn't going to let anybody stand in my way.
Including her husband, who she says gives her an ultimatum. It's the Bolin case or him.
It was a knee-jerk reaction, don't tell me what to do, and here we are.
Would you say that you married Oscar in kind of a fit of stubbornness?
Yes. I was going to take a stand, and I didn't care what people thought.
And that stand, marrying her client, is a jaw-dropping move, done almost solely to draw attention to Oscar's case.
How did you think it would help him by getting married to him?
I was a prominent person in my community. I've met 3 United States presidents, and so that's why I thought if I was his wife, they would pay attention.
But along with that comes a wrenching decision, agreeing that her husband will have primary custody of their children.
Many people would say, come on, you gotta know if you married a guy who's in prison that that's going to affect them.
I wasn't thinking. It's still hard for me to admit that.
Rosalie Martinez.
But she can admit that her strategy pays off big time.
Is she crazy? Can you say wacko?
Even landing the happy couple here on 2020 back in 1996.
I love it.
It was a tiny little wedding shown to an audience of some 12 million viewers.
Shaking, I'm very nervous. It's my wedding day.
But there would be no flowers or walk down the aisle.
AT&T has a correct call from...
The new Mr. and Mrs. Boland exchanged vows over a speakerphone with a photo standing in for the groom.
Oscar, do you take Rosalie to be your lawful wedded wife?
Yes, I do.
Rosalie, do you take Oscar to be your lawful wedded husband?
Yes, I do.
I now pronounce you husband and wife. Congratulations.
Good luck. Thank you.
Oscar? Oscar,
Hey,
listen.
I'll blow you a kiss.
You're blowing me a kiss?
Their honeymoon is in this courtroom just 3 days later to hear if Oscar would be given life or death for one of the murders.
You are sentenced to death for the murder of Terry Lynn Matthews.
Rosalie is devastated. That was nearly 20 years ago, and while some might be celebrating with the traditional anniversary gift of fine china, Rosalie and Oscar make do with prison cafeteria plastic, and not such fond memories of appeal after appeal, conviction after conviction, 10 trials all told.
The biggest misconception of Oscar is that he's a monster, and that he's a murderer, and he's not. He's a good person.
Though her husband's confined 23 hours a day, alone in a 6x9 cell, Rosalie insists he's a wonderful partner, though not a traditional one.
He's genuine, he's kind, he's funny. In that very dark place, he finds things to laugh about. And we spend most of our time laughing.
Do you see him often?
I see him twice a week.
And how long can you visit?
6 hours, on either a Saturday or a Sunday.
And what do you do during those 6 hours? Can you...
Oscar and I read together. We pick a book and we spend some... He listens, he's there, completely, 100%. Nothing's more important than I am. This is a letter he just wrote me this past Thursday. So
Oscar sends his wife love letters and hand-drawn cards practically every day. And with no Hallmark shop on death row, he creates each one himself.
You have been my dream girl from the moment we first met, thinking of you every minute of every day.
And what do you make of it when you get these?
They're just so special. They're priceless. There's nothing, I wouldn't want anything else. Not a diamond, not a car, not a fur coat.
And you keep them all?
I do. I couldn't bear to throw any of them away. I think the art of lovemaking is probably in these cards and letters.
Lovemaking, a delicate subject in this relationship.
People will ask, do you have conjugal visits? Have you consummated your relationship?
I find it very interesting why people would be interested in my sex life. It's no one's business, and, you know, that's not part of our relationship.
Does it matter to you?
No, not anymore. No.
What does matter most, she says, is proving her husband's innocence. A licensed private investigator and mitigation specialist herself, Rosalie is leaving no stone unturned.
I just want people to listen, that there are innocent people who are wrongfully convicted. It happens.
And she shows us an explosive report slamming a top FBI agent that could lead her husband to a new trial. When we come back, a closer look at crime scene photos.
This picture changed the course of my life in a split second.
What she's hoping will get him out, and what the families of his 3 young victims are hoping will keep him in for death by lethal injection.
30 years is long enough for this. insect is subhuman to be alive.
Stay with us. Tampa, Florida, a city of crisscrossing waterways and highways. Today, a buzzing metropolis. But in 1986, this Gulf Coast city is a sleepy destination for retirees. It's in this slower, more quaint Tampa that Natalie Blanche Holly is growing up.
And you can see Blanche here and me here.
Anita Holly, Blanche's older half-sister.
Give me a sense of Blanche's personality. Outgoing?
She was quite gregarious. She was happy. Somebody you'd want to talk to. She was so beautiful. Wow.
Was the key heartbreaking word. On January 25, 1986, Blanche leaves work from a local fast food restaurant and never makes it home.
My ex-husband calls me and says, I have some news. Your sister's dead. She'd been murdered.
Natalie Blanche Holly had been stabbed about 12 times in her upper torso, and her body had been dumped about 12 to 15 miles from where her car was found.
What was going on for you having lost your sister?
I was angry. Your whole way of looking at life just changes in an instant.
A stunning crime, but residents of Tampa barely noticed. That same day, a bigger story pushes Blanche Holly right off the front page.
It is the worst disaster in the history of the American space program. The Space Shuttle Challenger is destroyed. All 7 astronauts on board are killed.
11 months pass and the Holly case runs cold. Then, on December 5th, a second dead woman found north of Tampa. 26-year-old Terry Lynn Matthews, a bank clerk who never made it home either.
Right over here is where Terry's body was dumped, right here on the embankment.
Detective Gary Kling of the Pasco County Sheriff's Office.
She was wrapped in a hospital sheet. We noticed that she had several stab wounds in the chest area. She also had blunt trauma, basically wounds to her head, which was caused by a heavy object.
Terry Lynn was last seen here on a post office security camera, picking up her mail after work.
Her car door was open, lights were on, and she had mail that she had retrieved from her post office box scattered on the ground.
It's a mystery, but police have barely put up the crime scene tape when there's a third grim discovery.
There was another young lady discovered in Hillsborough County on the same day, Stephanie Collins.
The 17-year-old high schooler was reported missing when she never made it to church choir practice. A month later, Stephanie's body is found, a half-hour's drive from where Terry Lynn Matthews was discovered.
Her body had been dumped along the road, and it was found by a road crew. She was very badly decomposed. I couldn't see her again. She was gone.
Stephanie Collins, really did resonate with people because this is a 17-year-old girl, very responsible. You know, she drove her brother's old beater car up to the shopping center just to try to get extra hours, to work for Christmas, to make extra money. She, was doing well in school. And I think that really resonated with people because this wasn't supposed to happen.
When Terry Matthews' body was found and subsequently Stephanie Collins on the same day, it was extremely shocking for our communities. It left a lot of people alarmed, a lot of people called in, frightened.
Blanche Holly, Terry Matthews, and Stephanie Collins, 3 young women abducted, beaten, and dumped, all within a 20-mile radius. Could the murders be linked? Police have no way of knowing, and the investigation stalls. Even a reward for information goes unclaimed.
What is it like for the family, all of these months and nothing?
You try to tuck the pain away and deal with it a little bit at a time because it's paralyzing.
Then, after 4 painful years, a break. A Crime Stoppers tipster puts detectives in touch with Cheryl Jo Kobe, who has an incredible story about her ex-husband. His name, Oscar Ray Bolin.
Cheryl Kobe admitted being at home one evening, and when Mr. Boland walked in,
Stephanie Collins went missing, this time saying it wasn't just a purse she saw, but a person.
Cheryl Kobe went with Mr. Boland to an area in northern Hillsborough County off Morris Bridge Road and actually observed him dump the body of Stephanie Ann Collins out of the truck on the roadside.
But what about the third murdered woman, Terry Lynn Matthews? Police reach out to other Boland family members, including Oscar's half-brother, Philip.
When we met with Philip Boland, he told us of the night of Terry's murder. When he walked out to where Oscar was, he saw a body wrapped in a sheet, and at that point, Oscar Boland struck her several times in the head.
The noose now tightening around one person, but it's fibers found at all three crime scenes that ultimately tie Oscar Boland to all three victims.
We actually took evidence that were recovered at the crime scene in different samples, and we sent those to the FBI laboratory in Washington, D.C. And that's where the FBI laboratory was able to link forensically those cases. We've got a hair match from his head to the Stephanie Collins case that matches his head hair. The FBI laboratory also found wool fiber that connected the Terry Lynn Matthews case, the Stephanie Collins case, and the Natalie Blanche Holly homicide case also, all three cases.
Finally, police believe they found their killer, a serial killer.
There is no way Oscar Ray Boland is innocent. We've got overwhelming evidence. We've got him linked forensically with these homicide cases.
Oscar Boland works as a trucker, but when police go to arrest him, he wasn't traveling the open road. They find him here in Ohio's Lebanon prison, serving 25 to 75 years for kidnapping and rape. Boland is arrested and brought to Tampa. By the time he stands trial years later, he says he can't remember where he was the nights of the three murders.
This defendant, Oscar Ray Boland, caused the death of Terry Lynn Matthews.
There is no tie, there is no connection to Oscar Ray Boland to this offense.
The defense goes on the attack, saying the evidence is circumstantial, witnesses lied, and that the state is setting Oscar up.
The prosecution will never admit what they did. I am innocent of the murder of Terry Lynn Matthews. I have maintained my innocence all along. I don't feel you were fair and impartial at all.
Each murder is tried separately, yet through all the testimony, the grieving mothers of all three victims are banded together, sitting side by side every day.
There was an amazing strength, though, in seeing the three of them together. I can't imagine how it would have been if they'd been alone.
They were sisters in pain. They were right there for each other. And they learned to love each other and respect each other. They supported each other.
After countless days of testimony, multiple trials, and hearings, Oscar's fate is sealed.
Advise and recommend to the court that it impose the death penalty upon Oscar Ray Boland, Jr.
3 death sentences for Oscar Ray Boland. Rosalie distraught, the victims' families elated.
I believe there was one death penalty that came back in like less than 10 minutes, less time than you would think it would take to make the vote and press the button for the bailiff.
What went through your mind when you heard him say death? It was relief, you know. I felt that he got what he deserved, and it's a great sense of relief.
But that relief is short-lived. Could the forensic evidence that helped put Oscar Boland away actually be his ticket to freedom all these years later? Was the FBI wrong?
This is what I've been waiting for.
And while the verdict ends one nightmare for the families, another is just beginning. And the breaking news comes from us.
Now you're telling me that his death is not imminent?
No, not at this moment.
What is wrong?
Stay with us. With a steel-trapped mind and fierce devotion, Rosalie Boland has spent the last 20 years on a mission.
He's an innocent man, and the truth will come out.
Trying to prove her husband didn't do what a jury says he did: viciously murder 3 young women.
Rosalie, some people would say you're deluding yourself. You will find an explanation for everything in the face of this overwhelming evidence.
The evidence to me doesn't support a conviction. It does not. Oscar Boland, for me, has not received a fair trial.
And she sifts through that evidence again and again, even if a jury has already considered it and convicted Boland anyway. No detail escapes this private eye while walking us through her version of events.
The shoe tracks were size 10. I know what size my husband wears. He wears a size 8. The shoes don't match. Fingerprints don't match. There's tainted evidence in every aspect of this case, and I could pull it apart paper by paper, box by box.
And witness by witness, starting with Oscar's ex-wife Cheryl Jo Kobe in a wheelchair suffering from diabetes when testifying against him.
I noticed there was blood on the curtains.
Cheryl Boland's testimony is incredible. It's not to be believed. Cheryl Boland testified that her husband, Ray Boland, came home and dumped a purse at her feet that belonged to the victim, Natalie Holley. I knew that testimony was false. The moment I discovered this photograph, the light bulb went on, because the victim's purse is seated very prominently in the back seat of her car, which was found later after she was discovered.
It's wife against wife, as the current Mrs. Boland says the ex had a case of show me the money.
Well, Cheryl had motive to lie. She was in it for the reward money.
$63,000 worth to be exact, but only if there's a conviction.
If there's reward money out there today, you want part of it, don't you?
Yes, I do.
Then there's Oscar's half-brother, Philip Boland, who says he saw what looked like a body that Oscar was handling.
How do you discount that?
I received 2 recantations from Philip Boland. He said he never saw Oscar Boland with a dead body.
So he changed his story?
Yes, several times.
In fact, 3 times in 6 months in the case of bank clerk Terry Lynn Matthews, and one of those times under oath.
I said what you wanted me to say, sir.
So somebody put those words in your mouth?
Yes, sir.
And that somebody? Oscar's ex-wife, Cheryl. In his recantation letter, Philip Boland wrote, "I was told to and coerced into making false statements by Cheryl Jo Kobe." But later, prosecutors and even Philip would say it was Rosalie who coerced him into recanting, an allegation she strongly denies.
I have no weapon to influence Philip Boland into recanting. I don't carry a badge.
Despite the back and forth in Philip's story, a jury still convicted Oscar Boland of murder.
Sentenced to death.
2020's calls to Philip Boland were not returned. Cheryl Kobe died of diabetes in 1992.
You're so close to it. Are you able to really clearly see the evidence and be able to look at it objectively?
If you looked at the evidence and the testimony doesn't comport with the evidence.
In the end, though, Cheryl Kobe's testimony didn't count. Appellate courts vacated the convictions in all 3 cases, not just once, but twice, because they said Cheryl's testimony fell under spousal privilege and couldn't be used against her ex. Once again, Oscar was on trial. In all 3 cases, Rosalie at his side. He was found guilty twice of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. But a small glimmer and it's due to this man, Fred Whitehurst. For 20 years, he's been blowing the whistle on corruption at the FBI crime lab. And at the center of it all, a top forensic analyst who's helped convict hundreds of people, Michael Malone.
Anything that Michael Malone touched, any evidence that he touched, is not to be trusted. It can't be. The U.S. government agrees with that.
Malone initially handled key evidence in all 3 of Oscar Boland's murder trials. Hair and fiber the FBI used to forensically link all 3 murders.
When I was down in Florida, a couple of analysts came out and said, you got to stop this Michael Malone guy.
In 2014, the Office of the Inspector General blasted Malone, releasing a scathing 135-page report discrediting his work, the government itself turning on one of its own. The report says Michael Malone repeatedly created scientifically unsupportable lab reports and provided false, misleading, or inaccurate testimony at criminal trials.
The culture at the FBI laboratory was one of, we have to establish guilt, plain and simple.
2020 tracked down Michael Malone, the man fingered in those FBI accusations. Now retired in Virginia, we asked him about that report.
It says you've been responsible for many errors and unreliable testimony.
No comment.
No comment? What about...
No comment.
In my mind, Michael Malone is a serial killer with a lab coat. And there have been potentially people who've been executed based upon evidence that Michael Malone handled. It's frightening. Frightening.
Especially given that her husband could be next in line for execution.
If what you say is true, then Oscar Bolen is the unluckiest man alive.
I would say so.
To have coincidentally been linked to 3 different murders and to have been convicted so many times.
Well, if you have an FBI agent who's making you a serial killer, when actually, in fact, these cases are never been connected, yes, then that would be a very unlucky guy.
But is the Malone factor enough to throw out 3 murder convictions?
But they're saying take Malone out of it, and there's still overwhelming evidence that links this man to these murders.
Then let's do it. If the evidence is so overwhelming, let's do it. Let's try the cases. Let's see if they're correct.
And they're about to. Oscar Ray Bolen is filing 2 more appeals in the Terry Lynn Matthews and Stephanie Collins cases. Anita Holly, the sister of the 3rd victim, is outraged at the possibility of a new trial.
We're still playing games with this subhuman. Games.
Anita Holly thought all of Oscar Bolen's legal proceedings had been exhausted until she got the startling news from us.
You're telling me that his death is not imminent?
No, not at this moment.
What is wrong?
Take a moment if you need to.
30 years is long enough for this insect, this subhuman to be alive. I hate him so much.
Some of these family members call him a monster, call him subhuman. They even look at you as a monster for being attached to him. Does that trouble you?
It makes me sad. It makes me really sad because I don't want them to view me that way, of course. But I want them to look at the potential that this man has been wrongfully convicted.
When we come back, Dead Man Talking, our cameras go where few are allowed. To death row. And later, Rosalie's daughter asks her some very tough questions.
I mean, did you ever think what we had to deal with?
No,
Even
I didn't. I wasn't thinking that way, Catherine.
Stay with us.
For more than 20 years, Rosalie Bolen has been fighting to prove her husband Oscar is innocent of murder. The families of the victims are equally certain that he did kill their loved ones and are awaiting his execution. So what does Oscar Bolen himself say? Deborah Roberts went to find out.
Oscar Ray Bolen, convicted at 10 trials over the last 20 years for the murders of Natalie Blanche Holly, Terry Matthews, and Stephanie Collins.
I covered a lot of court cases and sat across from a lot of defendants. There was just something about this guy, just the flatness of his affect. Who is this person existing in the world, and how did he get to be who he was?
That's exactly what we wanted to know. 2020 was offered a rare opportunity to go to death row and meet Oscar Bolen in the place he calls home. He spends 23 hours a day in a cell like this one, counting down the minutes till he gets to see his legal aid and wife, Rosalie, during her twice-weekly visits. Here is 53-year-old Oscar Bolen today.
Rosalie is steadfastly committed to you all these years, after 27 years for your being in here.
Well, I mean, this was not a situation where she came in naive or ignorant to the system or the circumstances.
What is it about her that you love?
Because what you see with her is exactly what you get. She's a good person. She's a genuine, sincere, good person. Her heart's in the right spot.
What do you think you bring to the relationship?
Companionship, friendship, honesty. That there's nothing for me to gain by being mean or nasty or deceitful to her at this point. She can come and go as she pleases. I don't have a chain around her or control her or tell her what to do by any means.
So is the relationship more business, or is it
It's both. I mean,
romantic? What is it exactly?
It's both. Oh, I love her. I mean, there's no doubt about that. I mean, she's my best friend.
And Rosalie is as committed as any wife to her husband, believing Oscar is no killer. But he does cop to one awful crime.
But you did plead guilty to kidnapping and raping a woman at gunpoint 27 years ago today.
27 years ago in Ohio, yes. That was totally unrelated, had nothing to do with Florida.
Right. But to some people, you're a convicted rapist. How can they believe that you're innocent of this other stuff?
I was a very angry young man 27 years ago. 27 years later, would I do the same thing? No. I've learned a few things since then.
He did admit that he was responsible for a brutal rape.
Mm-hmm.
How do you get that to sit well with you?
Well, you have to understand, I mean, I know Oscar better than anyone, and he was also very young at the time. Oscar did accept responsibility. He pled guilty to that crime. And I believe if he had committed these 3 murders, he would have pled, and he never did that. He's always professed his innocence.
In fact, Rosalie and Oscar blame investigators for putting him on death row. While he says he can't recall where he was on the nights of the murders, he still insists he's an innocent man.
Did you kill Terry Lynn Matthews?
Absolutely not.
Did you kill Natalie Holly?
No.
Did you kill Stephanie Collins?
No.
So how is it that you could be here?
One man, Mike Malone, the FBI. He manufactured the evidence to fit the crime, and everybody got on board.
Michael Malone, that discredited FBI agent who handled the initial evidence linking Oscar Boland to the murder of all 3 women. Soon, 2 new hearings on that evidence. Could they lead to new trials and another shot at dodging death?
Do you even dare hope at this point that this may change things for you? You're on death row.
Of course. I mean, yes. But at the same time, I know I'm a realist.
But his wife has done the impossible before.
I'm in the business of saving lives.
For a triple homicide. Now, thanks largely to Rosalie, he's got a second lease on life.
I have a family now, something I've always wanted.
And what do you enjoy doing most that you couldn't do?
Going to the beach.
How did you get to know Rosalie?
I'd see Rosalie in visitation with Oscar. I said, would you be willing to work on my case? Because I really believe in you.
Rosalie dove into documents and came out with a smoking gun. Turns out a key witness was paid to testify against Seth at trial.
You know, they paid one of the main witnesses with crime-stopping money and hid that from the defense. He was a drug addict, said whatever the cops wanted him to say. The jury found that very distasteful. That was a big thing in Seth's case, huge.
In Seth's new trial in the winter of 2012, a jury was convinced that he's not guilty. He's acquitted of all charges against him.
Do you think you'd be sitting here now if Rosalie had not come on board?
Oh, no. I wouldn't be. I would not be sitting here talking to you. I'd probably still be over there next to Oscar. Yeah, she's just that good.
But even with his miracle-working wife fighting at his side, Oscar is far from tasting freedom.
You're staring at a death sentence.
We all have a death sentence.
But yours could be a few months.
Well, that is true. I mean, it could be tonight. It could be tomorrow.
How do you cope with that day to day?
I don't think about that. Because if you do, you'll go insane.
Are you bracing yourself for the possibility that you will lose and that he will be executed?
It's always there. Like one of my daughters told me, he's on death row. What'd you think was going to happen? You know? I mean, it's a reality. It's my world. That's what I live in.
She's determined to get you out of here.
Yes.
Do you let yourself hope?
Of course.
That maybe one day you'll be together outside of here?
I can't imagine walking out of this place and not being with her.
And while he's dreaming of freedom, what about 4 other young women in the equation? Rosalie's daughters.
You're Catherine, right?
Yeah.
His stepdaughter, meeting him for the very first time.
We made the decision. It sounded like a good idea. We did it. But I never could have envisioned the collateral effect, how it would affect you guys.
When we come back,
I can only hope you can accept my apology.
Rosalie Boland's marriage to convicted serial killer Oscar Ray Boland was the stuff of tabloid headlines. But behind the very public story of their marriage was a more private one of Rosalie's divorce and the children she left behind. Nearly 2 decades later, Rosalie reflected on her decision, and one of her daughters decided to confront it head on. Once again, Deborah Roberts.
there's collateral damage in every divorce. But Rosalie Boland's 4 daughters are different than most, with a mother in the spotlight and a stepfather on death row.
Were you worried or concerned at all about making that decision and how it would affect your daughters?
I didn't think, because they were so small at the time, that I thought that it would hurt them. I think if I did it over again, I'd do it differently. I think I would.
What would you do?
I wouldn't be married on national television, that's for sure. I wouldn't have done that, no.
Would you have married anyway?
I don't know.
So you weren't trading your love for your family and your daughters for the love of this man?
No, not for a second. No.
Her daughters may see their complicated life differently. 25-year-old Catherine sorted out her emotions in a short documentary.
Does he wear that gold chain?
Yeah.
Still?
Yeah.
He's allowed to wear that?
Yeah.
So I'm meeting him tomorrow. Is that what he looks like?
Yeah.
She hit you with some probing questions too. Did you think about them?
Right.
What about your daughters? Like, what about us?
Well, I thought that y'all were going to be okay. I mean, you had a lot of people that loved you. I think that y'all were incredible, that y'all got through the adversity yourselves.
I mean, did you ever think what we had to deal with?
No, I didn't. I wasn't thinking that way, Catherine.
No tears, no screaming, but some 20 years later, still questions and confusion.
I never thought what that was going to do to them. I really didn't.
Was it hard for you to admit that to her?
Absolutely. It's still hard for me to admit that. Because as a mother, you don't want to hurt your children.
But many people would say, come on, you gotta know if you married a guy who's in prison that that's going to affect them.
I wasn't thinking. That's an honest answer.
In the film, Catherine and her sister Christina relive their early years.
Did any of your friends say anything to you?
Not really. I mean, people were probably really embarrassed or really uncomfortable to talk about it. And everybody was just as shocked as we were.
The most awkward part would be having them meet Mom and then seeing their reaction when they meet Mom, because you know they're judging her from the moment they meet her.
I mean, everybody assumes that she's crazy. Everyone's like, I can't believe you've forgiven her. I don't think forgiven's the word, but I think no matter what your mom does, I think it's an unconditional love.
The documentary is called It's Nice to Finally Meet You, and Catherine means that literally. She takes her camera and her courage to death row to finally meet her stepfather, Oscar Boland, for the first and only time.
You're Catherine, right?
Yeah, nice to finally meet you. I've heard a lot about you.
I imagine you have.
She was a child when her mom and Oscar married and is the only daughter to have met him.
You could have a bond with someone for life, but really, what does the marriage put into it? Do you think it was necessary?
When your mother and I got married, I never envisioned that the publicity would be so I guess you say so intense, and how it would affect you and your sisters. And that part has bothered me. It has bothered me greatly. And I owe you an apology. And I do apologize. It's never my intent to cause you any personal harm or hardship or emotional pain. And I'm very sorry, Catherine. I can only hope you can accept my apology.
Bye.
Catherine agreed to make her film available to us. And though she and her sisters love their mother, they declined our request for an interview.
They're reluctant to speak out publicly.
Yes.
Why?
The media. They have their lives. They didn't sign up for that. It's unfair to make them have to go through the same things that I do. So I completely understand.
Oscar Ray Boland,
vicious murderer.
the truth will come out. Now the game-changing question. With the Michael Malone revelations, are new trials warranted?
You want him to have 3 more trials.
Absolutely. You know, when you were talking about killing someone and executing someone, is that really too much to ask?
Some people would say, when is enough enough? It's been 20 years.
For Anita Holly, who's still mourning her sister, it's more than enough.
I don't think she understands the full range of human sensitivity. I think she's got to screw loose. I really do.
The longer this case goes on, the more torturous the ordeal is for the families involved.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Does that concern you? Is that something that you think about at all?
I feel really sorry for them. I really do. I feel them. I have 4 beautiful children. I can't imagine. But I want them to understand that I wouldn't have dedicated 20 years of my life on something I truly didn't believe in.
But if all her efforts fail and her husband is executed,
I would still fight as hard for him in his death as I do in his life. I'm just not going to sit down and to be quiet because they can. I'm not going to do that. It's just not going to happen. You know, I will fight this till my last breath.
In the end, the courts rejected Oscar Ray Boland's motions in both the Terry Lynn Matthews and Stephanie Collins cases. Both times the courts ruled there was no proof FBI agent Malone had tampered with evidence in those particular cases. Additional evidence presented by the defense was also discounted. Oscar Ray Boland was executed on January 7th, 2016. Anita Holly attended, along with members of the other victims' families. She says Boland's death was a great relief. Rosalie Boland, meanwhile, says she will continue to fight to clear Oscar's name. I'm John Quinones. Please join us next time for another edition of 2020 on